So first, I'm going to go over and define what is reference data. I don't assume that folks on the call know what that is or have used it. It is a feature in the Enterprise Edition. So if you're a knowledge client, this may be one of your first peeks at it. To show it to you, I'm going to go over the main fields and features of it, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on some advanced features. And I'll cover, there's 3 different ways to create a list, and then we'll wrap up at the end with Q&A. All right. A reference data list is a list of valid values that you define locally in most of your data systems. Admit codes, employee status codes, a list of building names. When they're defined locally, they're typically called valid value lists. There's valid value lookup table, etc. The word reference data is actually used. IData did not invent that word, reference data. It's a term that's used in data governance knowledge bases across the United States for reference, no pun intended, for reference to a third-party list that you decide locally to adopt. And you choose to adopt it so that you don't have to manage it yourself. Some classic examples of reference data lists that are produced by third parties that are adopted by schools are the official list of United States and Canadian province abbreviations, Dun & Bradstreet's list of company names. Both of those are created and managed by third-party entities. One's the U.S. Postal Service, the other is Dun & Bradstreet, the company. And you make a local decision to adopt their list as the list you're going to use, and then you don't have to be an authority on those things. You just use theirs. So it's a governance decision to make that decision to adopt it. So reference data at its highest level encompasses third-party tools, but it also encompasses your own local valid value lists. Let's take a look at that module in the Enterprise Edition. So I am logged in. Reference data lists are a module, a smaller module of the quality module. So let's go down here, they're listed last, and let's look at the browse reference data feature. So I have 14 lists, and I'll just scroll through those slowly so that you can get a flavor for what they are. List of the divisions, list of academic programs, couple getting into some codes here, admit types, list of athletic teams, statuses, gender values, marital status codes, meal plans. There's a state and province codes. That's an example of a classic reference data list. Student activity categories, etc. I think that gives you a sense of the kinds of things that are listed in reference data lists. The purpose of it, let's take a look at, I want to demo first. Let's look at program academic code, or excuse me, program admit code. So here on the home page of a specific list, I have a name. I have a brief description of it. Over on the right-hand side, I have one or more functional areas assigned to it. And then I have the usual cluster of related content types that typically in Data Cookbook appears on the right-hand side. Related definitions, quality rules, or a quality issue. So that section, the title, the brief description, and these items on the right panel, those are kind of the functional or the business pieces of information about it. And then immediately we see it becomes more technical as we scroll down the page. And here we are presented with a table that is from Banner that consists of the code and the description for this particular item. So I don't have to have access to Banner. in order to view this list. It can be very helpful. If I open up the technical information for the banner, I see specifically the table that this is in, the column that contains the code, and then some other technical metadata related fields. Below that, I have a second list. This one is in my data warehouse. This one you'll note that the codes are a little bit different. If my codes up here in the banner instance were 2-character letters, the codes in the data warehouse, for whatever reason, are 4-digit alphanumeric, or excuse me, just numeric. The descriptions are the same, interestingly, but the codes themselves are different. So for each data system that you have that contains a program admit code, you could populate their list in this reference data list and therefore put on a single page, on a single record, all of the instances of the lists for this value, for this data attribute. So that's an explanation of it kind of without moving any pieces. Let's go into the edit mode and move some pieces around. All right, let's go into edit and take a look at what that looks like in the edit mode. And let's experiment with what it's like to interact with this. Let's delete the data warehouse instance. A minute. All right, had to tweak my permissions there. All right, so I just deleted the data warehouse one. Let's take a look at what that looks like to add an additional list. So I'm going to come down here and say add list. I'm going to choose my Cognos Data Mart as my data system. And if I skip down to click on technical information, I am prompted, if I had my data schema loaded, which I do not have for Cognos, I would be able to pull that up and make my choice as to exactly where in that schema does this table live. I'm going to close that. I can also manually add the list. In an Excel document that I have here on a different monitor, I'm going to scroll to the tab I have of Program Admit Code. I'm just going to copy paste this list of values. And then I'm going to place my cursor in the top left-hand code, first code row, click paste, and that will populate that list of values. I'm going to click update. And you can see that there's the Cognos Data Mart there. So if you, for whatever reason, with your iData Hub installation, don't have access to the schema or can't use the iData Hub to manage that population of that list, but you can export that list into some kind of a CSV format, you can use a copy-paste feature to populate the list manually and display that within Data Cookbook. Let's go back up and look at the banner instance that is using the iData Hub successfully. So this code, which if I click on it, will take me to that part of the schema still in Data Cookbook where that column exists. Actually, let me demo that a little bit better. Let's take it back to let's rebuild that banner. Let's delete the banner list and rebuild it. Okay. So let's add the list now. This time let's add banner. Let's make it the master list. And now let's see that there's that technical information not populated. Let's browse the data system. And since I just know my code, I could have also keyword searched around for it, but since I just know the name of the column that I'm looking for, I can keyword search it there. It finds it in a single column. I drag that column name over to the table area, actually. Oops, sorry, first I have to actually drill to the actual column name, and there it populates the schema of the table and the code column name exactly. Now I'm going to click Update. So there's my banner with my technical information provided, but I still don't have a list, right? You noted that. If I were using iData Hub classically, on the Data Cookbook side, I need to insert this information from the schema side. On the iData Hub side, I need to also indicate and schedule the import of the code table into Data Cookbook. Let's go back into the edit mode. There's a couple more fields in the technical information. You also need to enable for integration and say the frequency with which you will make that refresh. And then you set a couple other configurations in iData Hub to further pinpoint when that frequency is going to occur and how that integration is going to enable. In the interest of time for today's demo, I'm not going to show you the iData Hub side, but the point is that there are configuration things on both sides, on the Data Cookbook side and on the iData Hub side. So once those two sides are configured and the appropriate time occurs, right, if this is daily, maybe this happens at 11:35 p.m. every night, the first time that that happens, it would then bring in and populate the value table that you saw earlier. Again, since we're not going to wait for that, let's just copy and paste. Where's my trusty Excel spreadsheet? Here it is. This time the code set on this side is actually the banner version. I'm going to copy that. So again, for the purposes of the demo today, I'm just going to manually put that in rather than waiting for a hub refresh. So now let's click Update. And there's the banner list back again as a master list. So my point there of wanting to reinstall the banner was I wanted you to see how that technical information got populated on the hub side, the critical enabled for integration tick box that you have to select, and then you have to wait for it to actually populate. And today we forced it by just a copy paste. So those are, that's illustrating two ways that the list can be populated. Other point to mention about this, like all Data Cookbook objects, reference data has its own workflow. So there's a workflow panel at the top, and you would want to customize this so that the people who would request it or start it may be different than the different technical experts that are needed to provide that technical metadata, and then whatever other standards or approval processes you want to put. This is a very simple workflow. Most people have a couple more stages there to pass it to the people with the appropriate expertise at each point, and then it would be approved. The hub will not run it, I should point out, until it is approved. Okay. So kind of coming back here to the browse area of my list of, I think I have 14 reference data lists. I wanted to point out the filters. You can filter by data system or by functional area. Those are the two main filters. Now I want to show you a next step of how you can extend that reference data list into your definitions area. Let's take a look at the definition for program admit code. I often look for my definitions up here. It's a little quicker to find it. So here I am in the definitions, in the definition for program admit code. There's my functional definition. It's even got a technical definition for Banner. I want to connect that reference data list of the codes to this definition. And I do that by designating it as a quality attribute. So I'm going to click on Add Quality Attribute, and it prompts me for a validation type. I'm going to choose valid value. I'll choose length first, though. You can see there's the ancillary fields change depending on what type you choose. So I'm going to choose valid value. I'm not going to allow nulls or blank strings. I have to give a rule severity. I'll say normal. And then it prompts me for what's the name of that reference data list. Well, the name of my reference data list happens to be the same name as my definition. I've already created it. If I hadn't, I can create one new. There's a little shortcut there, but I'd already created it, and there it is. So now I'm going to click Save. So now, from the definition of program admit code, I can quickly allow a user to toggle into that actual list of what the values are. Clicking on this link will take me to the reference data list that we were in earlier. Notice now there's a related definition that was automatically populated once I made that connection with that embedded quality attribute. I think a tricky part is going back to the definition. There's a third thing, and that is the actual quality rule or quality attribute that was created when I made the linkage between the two. Clients treat this rule in a couple ways. You can just approve it as is. So it's just simply you're approving that you agree that this list matches that definition. And there's value in that, just in establishing the approval of that linkage. Because, right, theoretically, there's issues here. You see, it's a very simple workflow. There's authority here that's saying, yes, this is related. To make it a little bit more complex, you can actually use this quality rule in the technical metadata to actually physically execute the rule against a given data system to make sure that the data in the data system matches this valid value list. Are you with me on that? So that this additional step is the step you would have to take in order to actually measure the data against the list. Just having the list over here in my list of, actually I think it's up here, right? Here's my list. In my reference data list as is not executing against anything. It's just communicating. It's just communicating that this is the list, and this is the list in Banner, and this is the list in the Cognos Data Mart. You have no idea if your data, if there's any false values in your actual data. No idea. And there's value in just communicating. I don't mean to minimize that, but I also just want to be clear of where that line stops. So to kind of back up, to actually make that measure of the data against it, you have to go through with the quality rule and embed in the technical metadata. And again, in the interest of the call today, I'm not going to go through and actually write all that technical metadata that would be needed further to make that validation happen. There would be things on the Data Cookbook side, things on the IData Hub side, et cetera, et cetera. But you can, set on a regular scheduled basis, I'm actually going to look to see if my data is using these codes correctly. Okay. So now let's go back to the slide deck. I think I've explained, I've covered all the features that I wanted to talk about. I've covered several of these advanced features. We did talk about a master list. Let's talk about mapping of the master list. Let's go back to, actually let's go to a reference list for academic division. We'll show you some more detail around that master list. Academic division. So in academic division, I have two lists. One is from Banner, the other is from a Cognos data mart. My master list is Banner. The values are different, right? Banner's using this, Cognos is using that. When I uploaded the Cognos one, I was given a column called master code. Let's go into the edit mode and see what that looks like. And it prompts you to make that. So here we are. Here's the Banner one on top, followed by Cognos. Banner is master, Cognos is ancillary. So it's prompting me, here's my master list, Hume, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's right, that's this list, right? And so I can make that choice, and you have to do it manually. There's no way to automate this particular piece of it. And so then you are making it explicit. I'm going to click update, that this code in Cognos is the same as this code in your master list. You can load a master list that is independent of any data system. The first list that you do list will become by default your master list, whether it is attached to a system or to just not attached to any system, just a freestanding master list. So, and you can change that. You can experiment and change around that master list once you've got them all created, right? If you get to the third one and then you want to make that your master list, you can make all that happen. But my point is that master doesn't have to be attached to a data system, which I think is the stronger position, right? Then subsequent, the whole point of this is that subsequent data systems who would use this value list, if they're starting from scratch and you have communicated to them the master list, you have a better opportunity that new database administrator is going to adopt the master list values rather than invent their own, right? Which is maybe what happened here when the Cognos data manager created that. Maybe they didn't have access to Banner, maybe they didn't know what they were, and they just made up their own. Did the best they could, kind of thing. Which leads me to another point about why there's value in, even if you manually cut and paste the values in to your reference list, and you are not, for whatever reason, able to use the hub to manage that in an automated way, there's value in simply listing the lists as a communication device for subsequent database application managers, right? You don't have to have access to Cognos to know what the codes are. You don't have to have access to Banner to know what the codes are. There's a lot of value in making those codes more visually accessible. The last feature that I want to show is an advanced feature. It's called a roll-up. and to prepare to talk about the roll-up. The roll-up is how you can kind of crosswalk values for the same thing that are at different granularities. So let's take a look at student activities. So I have two lists. One is called student activities and one is called student activity categories. So funding occurs at this category level. I think there's like 7 categories. But there's actually like, 105 actual activity groups, right? A million different clubs and what have you. So there's value to having both levels of list, right? The funding happens at this level, but then there are actual activities that number individually higher number. So I want to map those together. So if I'm going to roll up, I'm going to start at the more granular level. So I'm going to start at student activities level. So there's student activities. It's a short list because this is a demo, but very granular, specific club names. And I want to roll those up to those categories. So when I go into the edit mode, I'm going to click on this add roll up. That link was always there. I just haven't pointed it out until now because it was too much detail. I click on add roll up and it prompts me for the name of the column. And if you have it already defined as a separate reference data list, you can choose it. So here's my categories. I'm going to choose that. I'm going to click create. And it provided this column, labeled it student activity categories, which was the name of that reference data list. And there are the 6 values that are listed in that list. So my job is to manually, so physics club is an academic club, math club is an academic club, debate, academic competitive team, scholar bowl, competitive team, sculpture club, art, figure drawing, art, intramural soccer, athletics. I guess I have 2. I think one was women's, one was men's. Athletics, French club is culture and language. So now I've mapped a granular list to a broader list. I'm going to click update. Now I felt an obligation to show you about that roll up because I think there is a common situation where you're working with 2 lists of the same thing in different levels of granularity. Reference data lists help you manage change to valid value list if you do have it connected to your iData Hub and someone changes the value in the host data system. When that scheduled refresh occurs, the iData Hub will pick up the valid value change and transfer that over into Data Cookbook again at the scheduled hour. And when that occurs, it'll trigger a new version of the reference data list and kick off the workflow. So there's an alert process. The other reason to use it is that you can communicate values without having to provision somebody to actually have access to go to the physical lookup table. And you can also use it to communicate crosswalks. You can connect a reference data list to a quality rule, or you can embed it as a quality attribute within a definition. And then last, there's 3 ways to populate. You can use the hub to automate it. You can copy paste from another source, CSV source, or you couldn't actually type it in manually. I didn't show you that today, but you can use the tab key and just type them in manually. I think when there's only 8 values, you could just type it in.